The Third Voice is a 1960 American crime thriller and drama film. The movie was directed and written by Hubert Cornfield. Cornfield also produced the film together with Maury Dexter. The story is based on the novel All the Way, written by Charles Williams. The film stars Edmond O'Brien, Laraine and Julie London in important roles. Laraine appeared in this film for the final time in her movie career. The film belongs to the kind of crime story where nobody can be trusted completely, and where a simple plan slowly becomes more dangerous than anyone expected. When we look at a movie like The Third Voice today, we have to remember that it comes from a very different period of American cinema. This was 1960. Crime thrillers were not always made with the fast editing, huge action scenes, and loud background music that we are used to today. A film could create tension simply through a conversation, a suspicious look, a change in someone's voice, or a character who suddenly behaves differently. That is very much the kind of atmosphere this movie tries to create. The basic idea is interesting right from the beginning. A man is brought into a dangerous plan involving another man who is supposed to be impersonated. He is not simply asked to look like someone else. He is trained to copy the person's voice, appearance, and habits. That makes the situation much more dangerous because the whole plan depends on deception. If the impersonation works, people may believe the wrong person is alive or present. If something goes wrong, the person carrying out the deception could easily become the victim. The story involves Marian Forbes, a woman who has been rejected by her wealthy lover. She is angry, hurt, and determined to get something from the situation. She becomes involved with a man known simply as the Man. He is not presented as a traditional hero. He is someone who becomes part of a criminal plan. And the more he gets involved, the more difficult it becomes for him to understand who is controlling whom. Marian trains him carefully. She wants him to become convincing enough to imitate the intended victim. That means his job is not only physical. He has to study another person's way of speaking, his mannerisms, his habits, and even the little things that other people might notice. A voice can reveal a person. A particular expression can reveal a person's identity. Even the way somebody walks into a room can make people suspicious. This is what makes the central idea of the film attractive. The danger does not come only from guns or physical violence. It comes from identity itself. Imagine meeting someone you know very well. You recognize his face, you recognize his voice, you know how he normally talks, you know his habits. Now imagine somebody appearing in front of you who looks and sounds almost exactly like him. At first, you may accept him, but then you notice one small difference. Maybe he uses a word the other man never uses. Maybe he holds a glass differently. Maybe he does not remember a small detail. That tiny mistake could destroy the entire plan. The Third Voice understands this kind of tension and builds its story around it. The central character travels to a Mexican resort where the impersonation begins to take shape. The resort setting gives the film a somewhat unusual atmosphere. It is supposed to be a place of relaxation, but underneath that surface there is suspicion, manipulation, and danger. People are smiling, talking, and moving around normally, while something much darker is developing underneath. That contrast works well. A beautiful or peaceful location can actually make a crime story more uncomfortable. If everybody is already surrounded by darkness, the audience expects danger. But when danger appears in a bright and seemingly relaxed environment, it becomes harder to predict. The man meets Corey Scott, and this meeting becomes important to the development of the story. Corey is another person who adds uncertainty. Once the man starts moving forward with the plan, the situation begins to change. What looked like a carefully prepared operation becomes less predictable. The most interesting thing about the story is that the man is supposed to control the situation, but gradually he begins to lose control. That is where the movie gets its real suspense. At first, it seems that Marian has thought everything through. She knows what she wants, she knows who she needs, she has prepared the man to play his role. From her point of view, the plan should work if everybody follows instructions. But human beings do not behave like machines. People become suspicious. People lie. People hide information. People change their minds. people become frightened, people make mistakes. And once a crime plan depends on too many people behaving exactly as expected, the plan becomes fragile. This is something the film shows quite effectively. The man himself is also an interesting character because he is not completely innocent. He knows that he is entering a dangerous situation. He understands that he is being asked to deceive people. He knows that the plan has a criminal purpose, so the audience cannot simply look at him as a helpless victim. At the same time, he is also being manipulated. That creates an uncomfortable feeling. We keep wondering whether he knows the whole truth or whether Marian is telling him only the information she wants him to know. This is one of the strongest parts of the movie. The story does not give us complete information immediately. Instead, it allows uncertainty to remain in the background. That uncertainty makes the viewer pay attention to conversations and small details. The title, The Third Voice itself, fits this atmosphere because voice and identity become important parts of the story. A voice is something deeply connected to a person. We may not see somebody, but we can recognize him by the way he speaks. In this story, however, even that familiar thing can be copied. That creates a very simple but effective question. If someone sounds exactly like the person we know, should we believe that he really is that person? The movie keeps playing with that idea. Edmond O'Brien carries much of the film because his character has to move through several different emotional situations. He is not simply playing one fixed personality. He has to appear as a man who is learning how to become somebody else, while also dealing with the pressure and fear that come from the criminal plan. O'Brien's performance is especially useful in the quieter scenes. He does not need to shout every time the character becomes nervous. Small changes in his face and voice can show that he is beginning to understand that something is wrong. That is important for a thriller. A thriller becomes weaker when the actors explain every emotion through loud dialogue. Here, the tension often comes from what is not said. There are moments when a character looks at another person and the audience can feel that something is being hidden. That kind of acting may look simple, but it is actually difficult. Laraine brings another kind of energy to the story. Her character, Marian, is not simply an emotional woman who has been rejected. She is determined, intelligent, and capable of planning. She understands that other people can be used to achieve what she wants. Her presence gives the story a cold edge. Marian does not have to threaten everyone openly. Sometimes the way she speaks is enough to make us understand that she is thinking several steps ahead. That makes her dangerous. Julie London also adds to the film's atmosphere. Her presence brings another emotional dimension to the story, especially because the movie does not depend entirely on crime mechanics. There are personal relationships involved, and these relationships make the deception more complicated. One thing that stands out about The Third Voice is its pace. Modern audiences may find the movie slow in certain places. This is not a film that rushes from one action scene to another. It takes time to establish people, situations, and relationships. Some viewers may enjoy this because it allows the suspense to develop naturally. Others may feel that the movie takes too long to reach the next major development. For a 1960 thriller, however, that slower pace is understandable. The movie wants us to watch people rather than explosions. It wants us to listen. It wants us to wonder. That is why the conversations matter. When the man begins his masquerade, the audience knows something that many characters inside the story do not know. We know that he is pretending. The interesting question is whether the other people will discover it. This creates dramatic irony. We watch scenes where somebody talks to him and we wonder whether that person is convinced. We watch his behavior and wonder whether he has remembered all the details correctly. We wait for someone to ask the wrong question. That can create tension without physical action. The film also benefits from the fact that the central deception is not completely simple. The man is not just putting on a costume, he has to become another person. That is a much harder task. A person can copy clothes, a person can copy a hairstyle, a person can even copy a voice after enough practice. But copying personality is much more difficult. What does the person do when he is surprised? How does he react when someone tells him bad news? What does he normally order? How does he speak to someone close to him? What memories does he have? What private habits does he follow? These are the things that can expose an imposter. The movie gets much of its suspense from exactly this problem. The man's situation becomes increasingly dangerous because he is surrounded by information that he does not completely understand. He has been taught what he needs to know, but that does not mean he knows everything, and that difference becomes important. A criminal plan often looks perfect from the outside because the people creating it know all the details. The person being used in the plan may know only his own part. That makes the man vulnerable. The audience can sense that. As the story moves forward, the possibility of murder becomes more serious. The man begins thinking about the murder of his tutor, and the plan starts to become more than an impersonation exercise. Now there is a real possibility that someone will die. Once murder enters the picture, the stakes become much higher. The movie does not need to constantly show violence. The idea itself creates pressure. The man has to decide how far he is willing to go. This is where the movie becomes more than a simple mystery. It becomes a story about greed, manipulation, trust, and personal responsibility. Marian may have her own reasons. The man may have his own reasons. The other characters may have secrets of their own. The audience is left to decide whom to trust. And that is exactly what a good crime thriller should do. A strong thriller does not simply ask who is the villain. It asks, what does everybody want? Because once we understand what people want, we can understand what they might be willing to do. In The Third Voice, money and personal revenge are major forces. Marian's relationship with the wealthy tycoon has ended badly, and she wants to respond to that situation. Her emotional anger becomes connected to a larger criminal plan. This is one area where the film reflects the crime stories of its period. Personal relationships can quickly turn into dangerous schemes when money and betrayal enter the picture. The story has a slightly uncomfortable moral quality because the people involved are not innocent victims caught accidentally in a crime. They make choices, they accept risks, they believe they can control the consequences, but the consequences begin controlling them instead. That is a very familiar idea in crime cinema. A person commits one dishonest act to solve one problem. Then another problem appears. So he commits another dishonest act. Then he has to cover that one. Before long, he is trapped inside a situation that is much larger than the original problem. That is essentially what happens here. The title The Third Voice becomes more meaningful as the deception develops because the movie keeps asking us to think about who is really speaking and who is really being represented. There is also a psychological side to the story. The man is not simply copying someone. He is gradually losing the boundary between his own identity and the identity he is pretending to have. That can be psychologically dangerous. When a person spends enough time pretending to be somebody else, the question becomes, where does the performance end and the real person begin? The movie does not turn this into a modern psychological study, but the idea is present throughout the story. That is one reason the film remains interesting, even though its style belongs to another era. The direction by Hubert Cornfield is fairly controlled. He understands that the central story does not need excessive decoration. The direction keeps attention on the characters and the deception. The film's visual style also fits the period. It has the look of an older crime picture with a strong emphasis on atmosphere, locations, and faces. The camera often allows us to observe rather than forcing information upon us. That can make the movie feel slower, but it also gives the viewer time to think. The screenplay, based on Charles Williams' novel All the Way, gives the story a strong basic idea. The concept of an imposter being trained to copy another person's voice and habits is naturally suited to a thriller. The main weakness is that some parts of the plot can feel more complicated than necessary. There are moments when the audience may feel that characters are making choices mainly because the story needs another twist. That is a common problem in older thrillers. When a film is built around secrets and surprises, it can sometimes become too dependent on characters hiding information from one another. Still, the central idea is strong enough to hold attention. The movie also deserves credit for avoiding the kind of exaggerated action that often dates crime films. Its danger comes from uncertainty. The man does not know whether the plan will succeed. The people around him do not know whether they are being deceived, and the audience does not know exactly how far the scheme will go. That creates a quiet but persistent tension. There is also an interesting contrast between the wealthy world surrounding the criminal plan and the emotional desperation underneath it. Money is present, but money does not automatically bring security. The characters have access to wealth and opportunity, yet they are still driven by jealousy, revenge, and fear. That gives the story a darker side. The film's strongest merit is clearly its central concept. The second major strength is the atmosphere. The third is the performances, especially Edmond O'Brien's ability to carry the difficult role at the center of the story. Laraine Day's performance also helps because Marian needs to feel intelligent and dangerous without becoming cartoonish. Julie London adds another emotional layer. Another merit is the way the movie uses identity as a source of suspense. The impersonation is not just a plot trick. It affects how we understand every conversation. A character can be telling the truth while the audience knows that the person listening is not who he appears to be. That makes ordinary scenes feel dangerous. The film also benefits from its relatively serious tone. Even though there are moments that may seem dated to modern viewers, the movie does not treat its central crime as a joke. There is a sense that actions have consequences. That helps the thriller maintain its seriousness. But the movie has weaknesses too. The biggest problem for a modern viewer is probably the pacing. Some sections move slowly, and viewers who are used to modern thrillers may feel impatient. The second weakness is that certain character motivations are not developed as deeply as they could have been. We understand the basic reasons behind the plan, but some emotional details are left somewhat thin. Another weakness is that the story can feel complicated in places. The identity switching idea is interesting, but when several characters and motives become involved, the audience has to pay close attention. That is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can make the movie less immediately accessible. Some viewers may also feel that certain twists are easier to predict today, because cinema has used similar ideas many times since 1960. This is important when judging an old film. A modern audience has seen hundreds of stories involving mistaken identity, doubles, impersonation, and criminal schemes. So something that have felt fresh in 1960 can feel familiar now. That does not mean the film copied modern movies. It is actually the opposite. The later movies came after films like this had already explored such ideas. That is why The Third Voice is worth looking at as part of the history of crime cinema. It shows a period when filmmakers could build an entire thriller around identity, voice, and deception without needing enormous production spectacle. The movie is also interesting because of its place in the careers of its performers. For Laraine Day, it was her final film appearance, which gives the movie an additional historical importance. For Edmond O'Brien, the role gave him another opportunity to show his strength in a serious crime story. Julie London also fits naturally into the film's noir atmosphere. The black and white or period visual feeling, the suspicious characters, the dangerous plan, and the emotional betrayal all fit comfortably within the broader tradition of film noir and crime drama. At its heart, The Third Voice is about pretending. One person pretends to be another. People pretend to love each other. People hide their real intentions. A person who is being used believes he understands the plan, but he may not know the full truth. That is what makes the story interesting. The movie keeps reminding us that appearances can be dangerous. Someone can look innocent and still be planning something. Someone can sound familiar and still be an imposter. Someone can say that he loves you and still be using you. Those ideas are not limited to 1960. They are still relevant. That is why the movie can still work for viewers who enjoy older thrillers. It is not a perfect film. It does not have the speed of a modern crime movie. It does not have the huge action sequences that many current audiences expect. It also has moments where the plot feels a little too carefully arranged. But if we watch it for what it is, a character-driven crime thriller built around deception, it becomes much more enjoyable. The movie asks the viewer to be patient. It wants us to observe. It wants us to listen to voices and conversations. It wants us to notice changes in behavior. And most importantly, it wants us to keep asking one question. Who is telling the truth? That question carries the movie. The more the man becomes involved in the scheme, the more difficult it becomes to separate the truth from the performance. At some point, the danger is no longer only about whether he can fool other people. It is also about whether he can escape the consequences of the deception. That is where the film gets its emotional weight. A criminal plan may begin with confidence. It may even look clever. But once real people are hurt, cleverness is no longer enough. The characters have to face what they have created. And that is the darker message sitting underneath the thriller. For me, the best way to appreciate The Third Voice is not to watch it expecting a modern action film. Watch it as an old-fashioned suspense story. Give it time. Pay attention to the dialogue. Watch the actors' expressions. Notice how the film builds suspicion without constantly explaining everything. If you do that, the movie has much more to offer. The story is not driven by one huge surprise alone. It is driven by a chain of decisions. One decision leads to another. One lie creates another lie. One deception requires another deception, and eventually the people involved begin to realize that they are no longer controlling the situation. That is the real strength of the film. It understands that the most dangerous trap in a crime story is often the trap created by criminals themselves. In the end, The Third Voice may not be the kind of thriller that will satisfy someone looking for fast action from beginning to end. But for viewers who enjoy old crime dramas, psychological tension, and stories involving identity and deception, it is an interesting film to revisit. The film has an old-fashioned quality, but that is also part of its charm. It belongs to a time when a thriller could depend on a face, a voice, a secret, and a suspicious conversation. And sometimes that is enough. Main merit is the idea. The main weakness is the pace. The strongest performance comes from Edmond O'Brien, while Laraine gives the story a strong presence as Marian. Hubert Cornfield's direction keeps the film focused on its central deception, even if some portions feel dated. The story's biggest success is that it makes us question identity. When we hear a voice, we normally assume we know who is speaking. This movie tells us not to be so sure. And that is probably the best reason to watch The Third Voice today. It is a crime story, but underneath the crime is a simple human idea. People can pretend, people can lie, people can change their identity, but eventually the truth has a way of catching up. That is the point where the movie becomes more than just an old thriller. It becomes a warning about what happens when people believe they can control deception forever.